about an hour for discussion and debate. I'd like to thank everyone for some really provocative but also rich issues raised, both in terms of experience, in terms of practice, in terms of the industry, in terms of geography, in terms of gender norms, etc. Loads of interesting issues. We'll start off with taking questions from the floor.
Selection of a performance, a stage name, I guess, and what goes in, why neo-feminist burlesque names sound one way, and why like another performance genre that does that is, say, clown, but their names always sound very different. You could probably, if you had a list, you could pick, okay, burlesque clown, burlesque clown. It's pretty easy. Yeah, what do you guys know about that?
I mean, it's interesting that you say clown and burlesque, because I often feel that burlesque is a form of clowning, because burlesque is kind of glamour clown in a way, and also poking fun at a particular person in society or theme or something. I mean, I think a name, there are a lot of, there's a troupe in Seattle called the Von Foxies, and they poke fun at the idea of the name, like, because there's a lot, like Dita Von Teese, a lot of performers pick up the Von and the le, la, la, it's like, they use a lot of, like, French words, like, I don't want to, like, make fun of anyone particularly, but, but they took it on the sort of Von idea that was funny to them. I think, a name can be something that a performer might think is funny, or, a person that they have, a name that identifies them in a certain way, Dirty Martini, she's, it's funny because the drink is called Dirty Martini. Her last name is Martini, like her real last name is Martini. So, dirty is, a way that a performer is considered, burlesque performer. So I think it depends on the unique person, but, did I answer your question?
I think also sometimes they have a sexual innuendo, like Buster Hyman, or somebody else going, it's Leggy P, sort of Peggy Lee. So I mean, burlesque, there's always this, drag also. There's always
the puns go into it.
Yeah.
Part of it, right. I'm a bit unclear about the history of it. I know I've read bits and bobs, and I think there's different, sort of documentation that say different things about the history of burlesque. But my understanding is, like, the 1940s, 50s, you probably know, the ladies had very fancy names then, didn't they? Which, and I've seen a lot of footage from that time, which on one hand is again, it's beautiful, and it's actually quite old, sometimes older ladies my age. But again, very fancy, very flowery, and again, I sort of find that, I'm not sure what the root is, I don't know. But I know that I quite liked, I like the fact that I can create a different identity to Lisel Terran. And I chose purposefully to call myself Doris Latrine as in toilet, because it's not sexy like Dirty Martini. So, yeah. I don't know if anybody, because there's other performers here who might know a bit more than I do.
I think that in the beginning, I could be wrong, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I think in the beginnings of burlesque in sort of late 19th century and so on, one of the things about it was that when people didn't have a lot of money, they could go to a theatre and see somebody dressed up like a queen or like their oppressors, as it were, and see that person then take their clothes off, which made them feel good that they could see a duchess or somebody doing something really naughty, and it was to poke fun at the people that had more money than they did. And so to back that up, they kind of gave themselves really grand and fancy names, and so they were exotic names like a French name or the Von from the Germanic countries, and that's kind of left a legacy, so that the burlesque performers now, to give themselves a burlesque identity, have kind of taken some of that nomenclature and into their own naming, I think.
Great. Well, I have a question that kind of follows on from the concept of what performers call themselves, but I've noticed that the title Miss is used a lot, and that seems a little bit incongruous with the feminist movement towards using Ms. And part of the context of what makes me uncomfortable is it reminds me of the use of the word boy in the United States and kind of southern states, and how that was a really normalized way of calling any black man was related to this boy, and it was kind of a very institutionalized, infantilizing way of addressing someone that was often used very innocently, but people have kind of turned against it. I was just wondering, if there are feminist burlesque performers who object to the use of miss as an infantilizing element.
To defend myself, my name isn't Miss Fancy Chance, it's actually just Fancy Chance. But I absolutely understand where you're coming from, and it is, I mean, I think a lot of people use it very innocently, and they just, because your question was actually, your observation was actually extremely thoughtful, and I think that a lot of people just aren't quite that thoughtful about things.
Isn't it partly a joke as well?
Yeah, I mean, it can be, if, you know,
Yeah, the playfulness and the silliness.
It's a joke.
Yeah, I mean, just really to pick up on that point, I was very interested, I think it was in Darlinda's talk, that you were talking about self-reflexivity and agency. Agency often, I think, is used as a term of the ability to self-define and the ability to express oneself and so on. But I think also that's a very subtle and interesting point, and it caught my attention, because you said it was about the ability to comment on the situation in hand. So it's not just to say, this is me, this is the performance I'm making, in the way that other panellists have talked about. It's also to self-reflexively comment on the situation in hand. And I'm just wondering, arising out of this discussion of the word miss, as you were saying that, I thought, how many times I've answered the phone or answered the door and somebody's sort of gone, is it miss or Mrs.? And it's like you've got a choice of the two. So I wonder if the staging of the use of miss as a term is exactly what you said it was, which is a comment on the situation in hand, which is that so often the positioning of female identity offers such a narrow range of choice in terms of how we're able to self-define, and that in a sense, I mean, just to broaden this out to, I suppose, a question to the panel, is that something that you would all agree with, that agency demands this sort of self-reflection on the situation in hand, as well as being about forms of self-expression? Question mark.
I think that for a lot of people, the appropriateness, you know, and they decide they're going to own it, just like a lot of black people have appropriated the N-word, you know, and decided we're going to reclaim this and we're going to make this our word. We're going to define it for ourselves, and I think that's certainly true of drag queens who put themselves in this.
Understood.
So I misunderstood.
I think one of the things I'd like to suggest is that the entire kind of neo-burlesque scene isn't a blanket platform for either being a feminist or not feminist. I think it's made up of multiple individuals with different political positions. And I think for some people working in that scene, it's very much about a kind of homage or recognition of the past. And some people want to claim a part of that past and that femininity just as a form of pleasure, and enjoy the use of Miss, or maybe names that are of a bygone era like Lily or Scarlet. Whereas other people operate much more operate in a different kind of critical way, and choose very clearly not to use Miss because of what it carries in the way of certain feminist critiques. So I think the use of, or to even use it in a parodic way as well. So I think there's the opportunity to work with certain conventions through different kind of subject positions. That makes sense.
I think it's also worth noting that queer, of course, was a term of appropriation, and especially when we're talking fairly happily to throw queer into things, but you might want to ask, when is queer actually appropriate to use in relation to neo-burlesque? We can certainly see why it might be in terms of transgender performance, where we can definitely see evidence of the gender roles truly being shattered. And we might also be very happy to do it and associate it with certain locations of neo-burlesque performance, where it becomes much more easy to talk about the queerness of what's going on if, say, it's in San Francisco or certain bars in New York or certain sites here. But it might not be something that we're so comfortable, even with, you know, ardent feminists using in association with their performance. So I think that's another issue that people might want to bring up. Someone else had a question.
Yeah, I just wanted to raise the point that the people that are creating the performances, the neo-burlesque artists, are actually that. They're artists, and they're not academics, and they're not intellectuals, and they're not sitting there going, should I use the word miss? No. Oh, how about, you know, it doesn't, the work isn't derived in that kind of a way. So that's my first point as to picking a name or choosing a name. They come from the ether, as do many of the concepts for the shows, the way the work's developed. You know, it's not thought out with the pen and paper and done in that way. And also, just wanted to make a personal point about the whole idea of like feminist and neo-burlesque. Now, I've never really considered myself a feminist in as much as I was brought up in a post-feminist era where I was given the right to vote. I had access to equal opportunity education, employment. I had the choice to do whatever any man around me had the choice to do. So, I don't know, all the ideas of like, you know, feminists and the fights about it all, it lost me really.
I think I have to agree with you on that, and the way that I was raised the same way, and I think that, you know, having been part of this discussion has kind of given me an idea, like, well, okay, so this is, you know, now we're in a post-feminist time, you know, so now we.
And that, you know, and then if a woman turned around to me and said, you know, you can't express yourself like that on stage, you know, you're carrying on an oppressive female tradition, you know, I'd be like, well, actually, if you're going to stop me from doing that, then you become the oppressor, not me.
Right. Yeah.
But, I mean, for me, you know, on one hand, I think it's really exciting because there's some fantastic venues and places to be performing in. I mean, I sometimes am asked not to do different parts of my act because it's not the sexy bit of it. And, you know, and I sort of, I've often just gone, okay then, or, you know, and, I mean, I find, I don't know, I mean, I obviously hear what you're saying, but I find I think it is, even within this, I don't know, I think it is an issue. For me,
mean, I get asked to censor my work here and there, and I'm perfectly, absolutely willing to do that if you know, I can see that there's a case in hand where it's appropriate, or the work's inappropriate, and it's like, okay, I don't want to do that, you know. To not be able to present my work in a forum such as today, I would consider that highly inappropriate on behalf of what the whole discussion is about. Yeah, and that also with using the word neo-burlesque as well, was a term I appropriated 5 years ago to describe the work that I've been creating for the last 10 years. And so when the burlesque renaissance happened, and you know, I was getting phone calls to present work on these stages, and I was like, well, I don't think I really fit in, you know, like it's a little bit too edgy, it's a little bit too extreme, it comes from the fetish world. So I started using the word neo-burlesque to describe the work that I was doing and consider it to be very much for the 21st century. And I, you know, listening today, you know, so opened my mind, but I've always kind of considered that the retro Renaissance stuff was burlesque, and neo-burlesque was actually about the 21st century, and that you can't just call the whole burlesque revival neo-burlesque. It's not challenging any new notions, it's not, you know, showing anything different.
Can I make a comment? Yeah. I just wanted to say, it was my, you know, I struggle at the moment of where I can perform, and I think we've got different interests. I think that's what's exciting about it. I think I've got my own particular interest in it, and like, you know, there's an enormous stand-up comedy scene. It's huge in the UK, and you have a lot. You know, you've got your Eddie Izzard, and you've got a lot of, you know, stuff going on, and I think, well, I could not put my work out there because it's a very male, I feel, very sexist, and my work would be misread, and I'm not that comfortable with that. And I find sort of the spaces, the places of where to perform this sort of work sometimes quite limiting, actually. Hands are going up.
I was moved to read recently that in Texas there was a bush bashing event, a burlesque night, and the GIs were coming home and stripping the medals as a form of protest. Does the panel think that will take form in the UK? As a form of protest. Burlesque as a form of protest.
There have been posting here recently, haven't there? It was like a film flags in
There's been
We did that in
protests
New
in
York.
Seattle where
Yeah.
women
Yeah.
have worn really big, hairy merkins, which are basically wigs, on their crotches that say "Don't touch my bush," and burning bushes and this and that. So I mean, like, certainly burlesque has been used in when people do naked cycling through cities just because they want to. But that's a form of I've seen a lot of burlesque used as
It's interesting because I'm not aware of any UK instances of that kind of burlesque show, but I'm also not aware of very many kind of short form cabaret, variety, blah blah, whatever of any genre in the UK that are specifically protest oriented. Is anybody?
David Hoyle.
Huh?
David Hoyle.
David Hoyle, yeah. Yeah, and the only one, and kind of different actually. So I think that there's not a huge, I've only been here for 4 years, but I get the sense that there isn't a huge, or anymore anyway, a huge precedent or history of that. I mean, maybe.
I think there was in the 80s.
Yeah. It just hasn't come back yet, so somebody do it.
I was just wondering about male desire, which is probably quite an unpopular subject. But I mean, if to ask the performers, if a straight man came to the show and was turned on and just found it really sexy, is he missing the point? And would you be disappointed, or is that a valid reaction?
I'm not a performer, but I don't think there's anything
valid
wrong with
reaction.
anyone being turned on by anything, really.
It's not the purpose of the show, but it's a valid reaction.
Yeah.
Every reaction's valid.
Yeah.
I think if you put yourself in that position, even if your routine is sort of satirical, if you're taking your clothes off, you can't expect everybody to take it the way that you kind of want, or to hope for it to be taken. And there are likely to be, there are men in the audience, and you've got your boobs out.
And women.
And
Well,
women,
and that's kind of the point. For me, that's one of the biggest points: is you cannot dictate what your audiences will feel unless you hand pick them, and even then you can't. So if as a performer, in whatever context, but if as a performer I go in and I expect them to be okay with the fact that I'm trans, and I get mad or stomp off the stage or refuse to do a show because they're not, then I'm missing the point, actually. We can't, as performers, we cannot dictate how someone's going to feel, and that's actually the beauty of it as far as I'm concerned.
I was just going to say, I'd agree very much. I think you can't expect a singular reaction, and many performers are working very explicitly with tease and undressing. So I think, again, it's a completely sort of valid and expected reaction from some audience members.
There was a question at the back, but maybe yes, in which case we'll go.
Can I just raise a point that I know that a lot of people said that burlesque is about not objectifying, and that it's this sort of great sort of reclamation, but perhaps by the very act of entertaining people by taking your clothes off, you are objectifying yourself. But what burlesque, neo-burlesque particularly, does is offer a different set of parameters for that objectification. So what you're doing is that you're making it sexy to be funny, you're making it sexy to think, to have an opinion, and that's where it differs from, say, contemporary striptease. So you are objectifying yourself, but you're sort of making different parameters, and therefore, if for instance, heterosexual man in the audience gets turned on by somebody doing a very, very witty, intelligent, funny, or sort of revolutionary kind of piece, then that's brilliant. That's absolutely perfect. I don't know what other people on the panel think about whether it is objectifying yourself or not. I'm curious because a lot of people have talked about how they're not objectifying themselves.
I think that objectification can be like I talked about a little bit, like that the fact that like in the United States my body is average, quote unquote. So objectifying it and saying this is sexy. You need to find this sexy, or you don't need to, but that's what I'm saying with my statement. This is sexy and funny. That audience member, that woman who's like, oh, that's sexy. That means I'm sexy. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's good. I think that we can make the objectification a positive thing. Definitely.
I was just going to reiterate what she was saying about men finding it attractive, women who are intelligent, attractive. I think that's absolutely I would question the idea that maybe that the objectification begins when the performer takes their clothes off. I think that the objectification begins in the morning when we all put our clothes on. And, you know, do you have a high heel on your shoe? Do you not? Are you going horseback riding? You know, if you're not going horseback riding, you don't need that high heel on your shoe. So you've already made a choice to wear the footwear that sends that traditional female, it enhances the traditional female shape. So, yeah, I don't know. I guess it's a cycle almost, you know, depending. And fashion is so relevant to this discussion, I think.
All right, I'm going to take it down even way further than that. When you walk down the street and you look at someone and you think they're attractive, are you objectifying them? You don't know anything about them. They might be an absolute asshole, but they're hot. That's objectification.
Yeah.
And the minute you step on stage, you're objectified as a performer. They know nothing about us.
Yeah.
It's where it's objectification in one level is where we're grabbed, and it is exactly what happens afterwards that's important. If we're objectifying someone smart, then we are open to that. Oh wow, I'm really hot for that smart person. You know, that's I think for me the idea that the high heel, for instance, is the objectification is really a problem in 2007. That it's not the high heel, and that I think it comes back to what you asked and what you were talking about. That it is all about agency. It's all about whether or not I choose to be objectified, or I choose to work with that objectification, or if I choose to accept or not accept people's how they present their objectification. You know, it's different for me. It's different once you transition, I have to say. I mean, but it's still, you know, I get on stage. Maybe the closest thing is gay men because they're objectifying me in a particularly sexualized way, and it's how they treat me that way makes it problematic or not. But I think my first point is really the biggest one. When you walk down the street and you see someone's hot, that's objectification. Isn't in and of itself the issue.
But the origins of that issue of being against being objectified came from the idea that women didn't want to be seen as just tits and ass, and that's how it originated. And I think in terms of how feminism has developed at this point, the idea of objectification has the possibility of a kind of erotic perspective, if you like. So, like for instance, if you're a little lover and you really like the shape of that person's ass, it's an objectification, you know. But that's what we do all the time, you know. There's the corner of the person's mouth, you know, that it's an objectification. There's something that you look at very closely. It's somebody that you're, you know, yourself, for instance, in the mirror. I really like that part of my neck or something, you know. I mean, that is objectification.
So we have to get rid of our bodies altogether to avoid it in any way?
No, I think the issue wasn't that. It's the issue of not being reduced to tits and ass. That was the original issue.
I think as well it's one of those very overloaded words that, you know, often when people say objectification or they get concerned, that it's got on top of what Diane's just said, exploited, used, not taken seriously, completely anonymous, hurt, endanger a victim. And so debates get heated very quickly because that word has come to have all these things stuck to it. It doesn't necessarily have to have those things stuck to it.
I mean, for me, I hate the word empowerment, but, you know, because of my background of having bulimia, you know, I sort of lived outside my body. You know, I was, you know, and unfortunately had very negative experiences and was told, you know, that my body was not right. You know, I was not right. You know, because that's how. Yeah. And I remember even things like going to see films and sort of watching, you know, these. You know, when would I be like a proper woman? When would I be part of this? And there is something I do enjoy about being objectified. I do, because you know, and I don't mean it just in a very narrow way. I mean it sort of, I am a woman. I do have legs and breasts, little ones, but they're there. There is something. Absolutely. Yes. So.
Okay, we have a number of people in the line in my head. At the back first.
Hi, yeah, my name is Cillian. I work as Ivy Page at Burlesque Compare, and I just want to talk briefly about drawing that constantly as my role as the host, but in a positive way. For instance, I won't let the performers on stage unless the audience are cheering and demanding for the performer to be on stage. And so by continually objectifying the performer, the audience's desire is increased. And I think it's an aspect of kind of a barter between the performer and the audience. And it's a term that I've started to call the burlesque barter, because it's an interaction that we understand as performers and that the audience understand as well. And I just really want to say that the idea of objectifying the performer, creating the performer as a star, really, in my experience, actually has been very positive for the performers. And I've seen audiences standing on their feet, cheering and whooping, and the performer comes out and has the most amazing experience. And as a compere, I feel that I'm kind of involved in controlling that experience of the audience. And just want to say that I don't think it necessarily has to be a negative thing for the performer or the audience about objectifying and exploring that feeling of desire. Thank you.
Okay. Barter is really interesting to bring this in, because it seems to me that one of the things we're not talking about here is economics. And one of the big things within, surely the base of the feminist argument was economics and where power lies within that. And I'm really interested to hear so many people talking about the way in which the producer and creator, that kind of line and division is being broken down. And yet at the same time saying some venues I will be asked not to do that or to do this. So there is a sense in which power economics, what is making the dosh, as you said right at the beginning, making a living, is really playing a part in that. I'm sorry, that's a lot of things, but just to throw that out.
Does anyone want to respond to that or take another comment on the same subject? Yes.
Can I just make a comment about the subject before? That I've been watching striptease for a very long time, and what I've enjoyed is the fluidity between the performer and the audience. And I don't think, as you say, I think you can maybe direct an audience, but I don't think, I mean, ultimately for me, I'm not controlled, and my fantasy can drift, so I can be at one moment the audience, and I can also be a performer. I am performing on stage, and I think as women, we're very much used to doing that, so that we can project ourselves. I think one of the great things when we put on the male burlesque performance nights is that straight men came along, and they said that they were surprised how much they'd enjoyed it. And I think that they got the same experience and the feeling of liberation watching another male be sexual on stage, and sort of still maybe be turned on by it. And you know, as you were said, I think lots of straight men are very confined into certain parameters, and they want to break out.
I wanted to comment on the money issue. Well, and the other issue. I think just a brief thing to say about burlesque is that there's not a fourth wall. Like if you go see a play, it's like here we are in our little world, but with burlesque, it's all connected. You know, so that's what I'm saying. As far as the money goes, I think that when I first started performing burlesque, I worked at this dive bar in Brooklyn. And the owner was some kind of, as you would say, dodgy, like just really like sleazy, and I was like, well, let's do a burlesque night. I worked Monday nights, there was no one there, and I was just starting, and so I started go-go dancing, and he had a pile of 51s, and he just threw them at me, and I felt like shit. I felt like absolute shit, because I felt like he did not understand that I was an artist. And, you know, I got $50, which was more than I even made bartending at his bar ever, you know, and I stopped working there shortly after, but I think that with the money, you know, there's a debate about whether burlesque is sex work. And I don't know if you know about the Sex Workers art show that I don't know. Do you guys have one here as well, or is it just it's coming over here? You know, there's been a number of burlesque performers that are on there. I guess I'm talking about sex work versus burlesque, if it's the same thing, but
some of the distinctions that are made is that often within burlesque, and you know, performance art and this kind of thing. People are performing because they want to, because they've chosen to, not because they're desperate and they need the money. So there is that ultimate choice of people getting on stage and doing stuff. I mean, I also think that most strippers choose it as well, but they're being paid. They are being paid, and obviously there's industry that goes around any kind of art or of anything, of any kind of action. So there is you know, hierarchies within who's being paid what. Can you be more clear as to what you mean about money, about the economics?
No,
because I always misunderstand this
yes,
question.
I'm not making that distinction of is a sex work argument. That's a whole big thing.
Yeah, I know.
Any, you know, it says actresses or whatever, they'll say, oh, they'll do it for nothing. I'm really talking about the extent to which you demand and can dictate the money that you get, what you're receiving it for, how much that balances between those who produce, who create the venues, and how much power you have economically within you. That's really what I'm asking you to open up a bit.
You can choose to, you know, if you want to perform at the Slipper Room, for 10 years they've offered you a cut at the door. 10 years. This is a venue that's been around for 10 years, and they still pay $100 a night for 2 acts and a go-go set. And sometimes it's less if they make less at the door, but generally it's $100. But I have a choice to say, okay, I'm going to go do that. I'm going to call up James, the owner, and I'm going to have him book me twice a month to make $100, you know. So we have the choice. We have the choice as performers.
Well, and what Cheryl said in the beginning about it is the mainstream. In my experience so far, it is exactly what Cheryl said. If you're in the perhaps the either traditional mainstream straight or sex work end of it, you're going to make a lot more money.
Absolutely.
And if you're willing to do those jobs or love to do those jobs or both, because I have had both experiences, then you will make more money. But then there's certain things you're not going to be able to do. There are acts that won't go over for those crowds, and you may have to change your act for it to go over for that crowd. And frankly, if you think of yourself as a professional performer, which I do, I will make choices that are about making money. Not if I feel bad about doing them. I'm not going to do anything that makes me feel exploited in the wrong ways. But I will make choices for okay, this show is a straight show. I know they have money. They're going to pay me. They ask me to do it. Absolutely, book me every month, please. But then I'll also do the other shows. It also. I don't know how everybody else feels about this, but for me, it's taken a long time as I sort of rediscovered who I was as a performer to stop working for free. And this, in 2007, I don't work for free anymore. I don't necessarily cost a lot, but I don't work for free. And there's a stepping up that you have to do, and I would love to be able to say, I make X hundred pounds a night for whatever, you know, and I don't work for less than that. I know certain shows I can say that. I've got a minimum if I make it and a minimum if I'm not. And then I, you know, that shifts around if it's a producer I really like, if it's a venue I really like, if it's going to give me something else, if something else will come from it, I will take less money. And if it's a lot of money but it might be tough, I'll take that too. And I think it's very clear. I think, you know, sex sells.
Yeah, there is a real sorry.
Yeah, no, go.
There's with it becoming very popular at the moment and very commercially viable, and all of a sudden everyone wants a cabaret act. There's new venues springing up all over the place. People are shoving stages into corners of venues. Beautiful gilded, you know, rooms in the middle of Piccadilly and stuff, and you're still getting changed upstairs in the broom closet with dirt all over the floor and no running water. And you know, so there is that kind of exploitative feeling starting to creep in on that level. And you know, the money's all right, but it's not, you know, it's not like you do a turn, you know, at the Whoopee Club 5 years ago when the audience was all like glamorous and it was new and fun and the money wasn't great, but you're part of it. Now there is that sort of tendency, and there's a new bar that's opened. I won't mention that. I did the opening night and the press launch for the last 2 nights, and you know, this guy afterwards going, you know, you're like really good. I mean, like seriously, you know. And it's like, yeah, cheers, thanks. And it's like, you know, you should be here more regularly. And you know, if I you know, I got a certain fee because it was the press night and stuff, and it was sort of near my asking fee. But he was like, you know, well, if you did a regular spot, you know, could we cut a deal, you know, because I don't really have much of a budget for entertainment. And it was like, well, you know, your food here is really good, and I tell you what, like, if I come and eat here once a week, are you going to give me my meal for half price? You know, no, it's not. So, you know, but you have to be able to stick up for yourself. and it's difficult. But, you know.
I think also there's some really interesting links between the economics and ideas around kind of inclusivity, because I was thinking traditionally those bodies that are very commercially successful in our society are ones that fit particular stereotypes. And one of the really heartening things about the burlesque scene is that it is, as I think you were saying, highly inclusive. So we're not just talking sort of bigger bodies, but say aging bodies. I certainly couldn't have got into any traditional kind of striptease context, or I can't be a film star because I'm 40 and I'm breastfed. You know, I don't look a particular kind of model. So it's quite interesting, I think, that whole relationship between economics and kind of inclusivity. But still, I think in society, we are burdened by certain stereotypes. I know, I think you were saying that we're in this post-feminist age, but actually on the front of kind of magazines, we're still seeing a lot of kind of stereotypical body images.
Totally, and that's why Dita Von Teese is so successful as like the masthead of the burlesque thing at the moment, and that, you know, I could like continue to push my work and my boundaries that much, but at the end of the day I'm still a small-breasted, shaved-headed woman. Never going to have the commercial appeal that Dita Von Teese has, because she has that classic sex sells, mainstream website thing going on. So,
okay, we'll take some comments of people who've been waiting quite a while. You have to go back, you were wanting to speak. Yes, who's turning around to look
Me?
over time? Yeah, do you still want to?
Maybe me.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. My question, actually, if you could go on to someone else, my question has now flown right off. I'll come back.
You were wanting to, yeah.
If we talk about economies, maybe what we should talk about is actually an economy of taste, not an economy necessarily of cold, hard cash. Because isn't there often a really false dichotomy created between what's seen on the one hand as being burlesque and artistic, and then on the other hand, the whole strip scene as somehow being non-artistic. And for me, what's really interesting being a feminist and a performer is how we can kind of make linkages across the whole culture of visual display that someone was talking about, because we've got this really intense moment of sexual performance at the moment where on the one hand there's an incredible amount of freedom, in particular for female performers, but then on the other hand, we are living in an age where the sex trade is, you know, if you think of the nocturnal landscape of London at the moment, as Angela Carter might if she was still alive, and you've got this multiplicity of venues where you've got women who've been trafficked from all sorts of places in the world to people like us who have the freedom to kind of go, I can display my body in whatever way that I want. And for me, where the interest comes in is how we can kind of make connections together.
How white and masculinist and Western queer art has become, queer theory has become, and we want to sort of challenge that. And I think we definitely need to think about that in terms of calling, say, neo-burlesque queer, but also we might want to in terms of calling it feminist. How much, and I'm reminded of Audre Lorde actually, who said, you know, you cannot use the master's tools to dismantle the master's house. In other words, why is it that I'm surrounded by all these white feminists who actually are doing an incredible job, but actually are forgetting that they're all white and they can't speak for me. So I'm just wondering how, when we're calling it queer, calling it feminist, it's still only telling part of the story, and the fact of what the panel looks like and the audience looks like, and that maybe the lineup this evening looks like. Certainly not a criticism of who's been chosen, but maybe of who's applied and who's out there.
Yeah, my experience of burlesque is that, I mean, for this night that we run, which is run as a competition, but it's really more of a kind of debate and a chance for people to perform, that is all ages. I mean, it's a female competition, the male one's separate, but it's all ages and all races, you know, and that's the beauty really of it is entirely inclusive.
Do you feel like you're actually getting, like, you really are getting people from all races in your lineup?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I think
we haven't had that many Asian women, but we had one last week. She was fabulous. Yeah, and Jo King, you know, is a I don't know how old Jo King is. She put years on her, but I think she's 45.
joking. In her 40s. And you know, she's a big woman, she's an older woman, and she's there teaching everybody how to feel, you know, amazing and comfortable within their skins, and that for me is one of the good legacies of what Burlesque is doing, you know, especially in relation to size 0 and that kind of thing.
I think in New York we're just now seeing there's a Women of Color burlesque show that's just happening, which they did a tribute to Jimi Hendrix. I didn't actually get to see it, but that's what they're doing right now. But there's really not as many women of color. I produced a Nina Simone show like a couple years ago, and I had to like get someone from Boston who'd never performed because there weren't any women of color, any black women to come be in the show. But I really love Nina Simone, so I really wanted to do the show, but I felt like it was kind of awkward to have a show. I mean, I had one black woman in the show, so, you know, and she had never performed before. So, you know, it's like, I personally don't know how to get more people of color in the burlesque scene, but, you know, I don't know.
I just want to comment on this. I think that part of the burlesque revival bases itself on a retro aesthetic, and that retro aesthetic pretty much was white. I also think that there's a kind of a class issue here, because I think that people who have the luxury of performing for free, of making the choice to be an artist, to make the choice of going on stage, you have the luxury of time and probably a little bit of money and education. And I think that that ends up excluding minorities, and that's just how that goes.
Yeah, but wait.
And
No, sorry, go on, please.
no, and just that that choice and opportunity. Well, choice is a luxury, and it's too bad that it happens to be a middle class luxury, but it is. And there's a lot of people from working class backgrounds, but oftentimes they've had the opportunity to get to the right school, or have the opportunity to, you know, see a lot of stage performance and really contemplate, you know, radical performance, or, you know, to contemplate being a feminist, rather than like contemplating how do I pay my bills?
Yeah.
You know, so that's my thing.
And I think, I think that's a relevant issue too. When if you're comparing, say, more traditional classical if you're comparing more traditional classical strippers to neo-burlesque performers, it's definitely an issue of class quite often. Yeah.
I am both. I do both.
Yeah, and a lot of people do both. I've done both.
Yes.
Yeah, but why do we have to can we redefine the whole thing instead of talking of exclusion or issues, and say that even white middle class culture has its value? Because as you said at the beginning, you know, it draws from a white middle class thing. What's wrong with that? You know, there might be a place for that as well.
I wasn't saying there was anything wrong with that. I was just commenting on why pretty much everyone in here is Caucasian, and the roots of that. So.
I was going to say, I think it also extends to all forms of entertainment and kind of areas where women are being kind of, you know, are famed. You know, you've got it in the fashion industry. I mean, to be honest, I can think of 2 black kind of models, and if you think of it, you know, in terms of, you know, the cinema and stuff, there's only a few people, so it's not just something that's kind of contained within this area. It's something that needs to be addressed on a much wider scale, and
Can I also suggest that it's not just about the numbers of people who are performing in it, but it's actually that if we're going to call this kind of performance practice political or radical, feminist or queer, but whatever, political or radical, it needs to be critiquing race as well as gender and sexuality. That doesn't mean you have to be non-white to do it. It means that that's what the performance could be about, right? That's one of the things. In fact, that's what queer means. Queer isn't just about gender and sexuality. It's about actually challenging all of the kind of component parts of identity, right? Class, race, etc. So, sorry, that's
well, no, just for me, that brings up a practical question. You know, we each have our if you will, of what our work is. My work seems to be, it's not everything I do isn't about gender, but it's very clear that I have this particular thing that I'm working with, and it happens to be transgendered, multigendered, queer, and white, and Jewish. So I believe, I agree completely, and I wonder on a practical level though, how do we then? How does the movement, is it radicalized? I'm not going to do work, maybe I might, maybe I will, but I don't see myself shifting my work to make it be about race and class specifically, because I've got my egg. It may address that in some ways, but they may be small, minor ways. So how do we then, how does this, if that's the criteria to call it feminist or to call it radicalized or political, but it's not about numbers, it's not about, you know, oh, there's a black person, maybe she wants to perform. I mean, so what is it? What do we think it is?
I certainly don't think that's what everybody has to be doing. It's an awareness of it, rather. And certainly you have the awareness of it already. But yes, it's spreading that more generally.
Just on the issue of it being a sort of a luxury to have the choice to perform, and about it being a sort of white middle class thing, I just wondered how the panel felt valid neo-burlesque was as a career, because I mean I get a lot of inquiries from people say, oh, I want to be a burlesque performer. How do I become a burlesque performer? What do I do? This, that, and the other. And I mean, I know myself from being a performer what my experience is of the economics of it, and I'm very much in control of my economics. But I think, you know, as compared to say conventional contemporary striptease, I think, you know, there's possibly a lot easier, not easier money, that's the wrong way to say it, but a more valid financial situation going on there. And how valid do the panel feel neo-burlesque is as a career, or is it just a thing that we do to express ourselves as artists and to sort of put our ideas out there in front of people?
I think the lucky, maybe not lucky sort of word, but you know, there's some performers who will make a career out of performing, but I don't think that it's realistic to think that for everyone to think they're going to make a career out of it, because there just isn't enough work or enough venues or you know enough places for them to perform.
It's the same as
money in it.
I think it's the same as the struggle for any artist. I don't think it's any different. I think that right now it's a hot time for burlesque, whether you call it neo or feminist or not. And right now there's a pile of money out there. Eventually, I think it's going to drop off. It's a fact. There will be people, and it will stick around because it's here now. But it's going to drop off. There'll be less work. But there might be maybe cabaret, maybe vaudeville, maybe variety. The next thing will go poof, and then everybody will be saying, "Oh, I want to make a variety show," and then there'll be that, and then that will peak. But it's all the same. It's all, you know, making a living as a performer is bloody hard go, and I don't think it's any different as a burlesque performer than anything else. It's sex work. Stripping is a different thing, and this inclusion of aging bodies, of differently shaped bodies doesn't exist. So it's like being an athlete. You've got about this long to be able to do it. And yeah, you'll make money as a career, as a person who wants to do sex work of any sort will make that for as long as they can handle it for whatever reasons, whether they're as long as they're a commodity or as long as they emotionally can stand it. So there's more money in that. It's not going to go away, but it's a very short career. So I think it's
also to do with a certain consciousness, because as an artist or performer, you know that there are other possibilities. You know, I mean, I perform in festivals in Madrid, or I did a residency in New Delhi last year, or go to dancing. I mean, there are lots of other possibilities because we're aware of them.
Yeah.
Whereas if somebody who's a striptease artist, you know, that's what they're doing. They're just a stripper, and these are the clubs, the Diamond Mills, or wherever they go to. They don't think about, you know, going to Australia or, you know, maybe they do. They might. Well, yeah, that's true. Yeah, it's a possibility. But I'm just thinking in terms of performance festivals, for instance. You know, because as an artist, what singles you out is, you know, like for instance, I think about Empress Star. I think about her work. It's very unique. It's very specific. It's not following some kind of trope or a formula of what you expect. And so her work really stands out. So she won't fit into, you know, going to a regular strip club where, you know, they want to see the same formula over and over again. So there are also performance possibilities for her outside of that.
Can I do that? You know, one of the difficulties I have with the present burlesque scene is that there's a lot of, and I'm not going to mention any names, but there are perhaps different groups and people and organisations who sort of setting up, sort of saying this is burlesque, and sort of setting up organisations and some good things. Not, you know, it's not. Maybe it's perhaps not where I position myself. You know, and it is very much quite a classic type of burlesque. You know, where it is about. It's purely. It seems to be purely around doing a sort of 5-minute teasing strip. Now, when I have students coming up to me and everyone's all excited, I want, you know, the number of students who email me, say, wait, can I go to a burlesque workshop? And I'm being very blanket about this. I've sort of, yeah, well, this is going on, you know, I'll give it to them, but there's a part of me that thinks, well, I don't mean to sort of go back on the topic, but just, I don't know whether, maybe I shouldn't be positioning myself within, just to throw this out actually, maybe I shouldn't be positioning myself within neo-burlesque, because for me, it's not just about sort of the stripping. I mean, for me, I'm interested in, as a woman, as a sort of, it gives me a sort of opportunity to make comical comment on my place in society. For me, it's actually very political. And I hear where the discussion is going, and I respect that, and that's part, for me, that's part of burlesque. I mean, I look around, and it's, for me, it's not all about sexual stripping. And people might disagree with me, and that's why I'm wanting to throw it in, because I'm feeling a little bit like, I'm not sure if I'm actually quite part of this, but actually Simon Casson, who runs Duckies, when he saw my act, which God knows what you'll think of it, said that is classic burlesque, what you're doing, Lyselle. Fantastic. So just to throw that in.
Thank you. I'm wondering what kind of responsibility you guys think producers and venue managers have to burlesque artists. There's a piece Ursula Martinez does, which I'm sure most of you in this room will have seen. It's a very witty, funny deconstruction of striptease, tongue-in-cheek piece, short performance piece. And I've watched that with a kind of art house crowd. I've also watched it surrounded by drunk hooray Henrys shouting. And I do sometimes feel that burlesque performers are hung out to dry by their producers and by the kind of organizers of burlesque events.
Can we take one more before you respond? Yes, is it the same?
Just, this is actually slightly off the...
Can we ask,
yes,
because we are running out of time, do you want to respond to that?
Oh, yes, because I think that programming and producing all of these events is incredibly important, and there's a lot of people running stuff at the moment who perhaps are putting people in the wrong place, and you can't just put this kind of act on without surrounding it in the right way, without introducing it, without putting it next to the right stuff, because out of context you put that performer in a bad position and you put everybody else in the audience not knowing how to respond. So I think it's incredibly important to think about, and for the performers to think about where it is that they're performing and who they're performing for.
I am going to go to people who haven't asked before. Sorry, yes, go.
Hi. I just had another question around choice, but a kind of different kind of choice, about access. I'm quite interested with what Lyselle said about offering kind of more complex understandings of the body's self, and I think the incorporation of personal narratives and stuff like that is really rich. And I guess my question is where these models can kind of be accessible to young people, to people who are under 18, or people don't access clubs for a variety of different reasons. I mean, Laszlo, for example, I work with young trans people, and I know that, you know, your show, for example, would be really quite interesting for some of the young people that I work with, but the access just is not there. Probably because they're too scared to go to clubs, or they don't pass, like they pass in their gender, but they don't pass as over 18 even if they are, because they look very young. So I just wondered what our responsibility is there. Like, so my question is, where is the access to neo-burlesque and feminism, for that matter, for young people?
To be honest,
There isn't.
I mean, well, the thing for me, it's not necessarily adult entertainment at all, and one of the reasons I wanted this symposium was, there's also at least a huge, big sort of development of live art and performance art, and it's very much seen as high art, and I find that quite troubling. And I would like to sort of put some of the work, perhaps, that you might see tonight in that, place as well, but it wouldn't necessarily be seen as sort of live art. And the reason I'm saying that is, it's about, there are performance tools that could perhaps be accessed to young people. Because it is about access, for me, it is about playing with ideas with the body as a text. How exciting, with visual, there's Ryan Stiles who's just some wonderful visual, work. So that's where I'm stuck with this, where we're at with neo-burlesque for me.
I think that it's all of these things, that what you're doing is valid, and also people who are doing a classic kind of striptease. I mean, for me, the most interesting stuff is when it becomes, political or highly skillful, is amazing in some way or other. And there is a glut of people that Lucy Fire was talking about who all want to become burlesque performers, because it's open to them, and if you haven't got any experience in performance, you can become a burlesque performer. And that's valid in its own way as well, but to me it's setting up the platform in the right way, and allowing people to express themselves in that way or other, and one isn't really more valid than the other. I don't know.
A question about youth access, if you will. Well, it's sort of, for me, there's 2 points. Like, one is, why do we decide, for instance, the disclaimer that you had to make for tonight's show? If you're under 18, you can't see it. Because somebody's going to be naked? What is that? I don't understand that requirement of society that you have to be 18 to see a naked person, or 16, or whatever it is. It doesn't make any sense. So, first of all, if we allow youth, if we want youth access to burlesque, yes, burlesque is all sorts of things, and it is often naked or sexualized. Not always, but often. And so can we let people under whatever the age is here see that? And as far as I'm concerned, we should. So what is our decision, or whoever is making the decision as adults, to say, oh, no, they can't see that. That's too much. Beyond, up to this line, but not that. Yes, you can see Laszlo naked, but not if he's, or you can see Laszlo, but not Star. You can see, but like, where's the line? And if we say there is no line, then we have someone who's interested has to make an all-ages burlesque show, and I'll perform at it.
With fast running out of time, I'm going to take only, I'm afraid, 2 last comments from 2 people who haven't spoken, the woman there and the woman over there.
Yes, forgive me for not remembering, but I cannot remember for the life of me what the word neo means, and so I'm wondering, A, what does neo mean, and therefore, what is the difference between burlesque and neo-burlesque? Is it the political?
I'm not sure it's a label. I'm understanding this.
What does it mean? What does it mean?
Okay, well, neo means new, and so it's new burlesque, and it comes back to what I wanted to respond to what you said a moment ago about that it's taking the burlesque in its original meaning doesn't necessarily mean have striptease and sex, and it can be politics, it's satire, it's comedy. And in this renaissance of burlesque, it's been championed by the feather fans, the nipple tassel twirling, the striptease, and that's what it's perceived as being. When you mention burlesque to someone on the street, they go, oh yeah, striptease, nipple tassels, I get it. And if they don't understand that there's all that other underlying history to it. So what neo-burlesque is taking the actual meaning of burlesque, being the satire, the political, and making it relevant for the 21st century. And so it may or may not involve striptease, nudity, any other boundary-pushing form of antics that one can imagine up. That and there, that's what I think.
Which one? You're being squeezed in behind you. Yeah, yes. Oh.
Well, this may be more for lesbian or for everyone, and I think maybe we should see also the neo-burlesque with the in connection maybe with the new circles or other disciplines or new revival of arts or performing arts that are more connected with the real performing arts and not with the sexual work or other kind of entertainment. So maybe like the clownery aspects or the comedy aspect or the cabaret aspects or all the aspects more related with the professional of the artist and the training as well, for example, of the artist and the burlesque performer, more than with the dancer of the let's say the striptease entertainment. So this is more for Leslie because I know that she trains also. And for everyone, and for everyone because I think more people here I know that trains in circus environment. So just
yeah, I agree. Yeah, and that's why I wanted to have this debate, particularly here at Central School of Speech and Drama. You know, at one of the sort of internationally renowned drama training school. And it was, you know, I mean, Sophie was wonderful, just like, yes, let's do it. But it is time to sort of recognise for me that it is perhaps, you know, it could, you know, it's an art form in itself. It perhaps could be seen as a genre, which is a little bit, it's, you know, it's complicated. It's very complicated.
That's a wonderful place to end.
Thank you.